And they embittered their lives with hard work, with mortar and brick. Whatever they did, they made it to be the most difficult. Any level of work they gave them, it was to break them. So Rashi explains what is the meaning. Forech, bavoda kosha mefareches is aguf umshabroso. It's work, hard work that causes the body to become brittle and breaks the body, physically to break them. But doesn't make a difference. As much as they work them and enslave them, the numbers keep increasing. So I'd mentioned him at Orach Chaim HaKodesh that they set certain quotas and they had to meet the quotas. And if they didn't meet the quotas, they would actually beat them and torture them. Because really, what was the objective initially was to destroy them. But as they increased the workload, they increased even more. So the Orach Chaim HaKodesh explains that they set quotas. And they met the quotas with great difficulty. When they saw they were able to meet the quotas, you know what they did? They upped the ante and they increased the quotas. It's impossible to meet it. They will kill them. It's impossible. So you know what they did? Hashem went, and it says, as they increased the quotas, Hashem increased the numbers of Jews. So it was a losing battle for the Egyptians. Here, the whole objective is to increase the quota, to minimize them, to destroy them, to give them something which is impossible to contend with. Hashem says, you're trying to destroy my children. As you increase the quotas, I'm going to bring a greater workforce to be able to contend with those greater quotas. So for them, it was a losing battle. Now it's very interesting now. The Torah identifies as Paro as Melech Mitzrayim. When he spoke initially to the midwives, he spoke to them as Melech Mitzrayim. These midwives we'll speak about here are not ordinary midwives. I mean, we have millions of children being born. These two midwives are not able to handle the workload of the numbers, meaning they were like the head midwives. Shifra Pur, they were the head midwives. They oversaw thousands and thousands of midwives who delivered the children of the women who gave birth, the Jewish women. So the king of Egypt says to the Mialdos, one his name is Shifra and the other one is Pur. Again, the Torah does not identify them by name who they really were. We'll see Rashi, but rather the Torah identifies them. They were known by their vocation. What was their responsibility as midwives? What was their area of responsibility? So Rashi says, Shifra, Zu Yocheved, Al Shem Shaperes Avlad. Shifra is Yocheved, this is the mother Moshe Rabbeinu, and the reason why she was called Shifra because she beautifies the child. That after the child is born, they wash the child, they clean the child, therefore she was called Shifra. That was her responsibility. She oversaw the midwives that after the children were born to make sure they were cleaned and they were beautified. Pua, who's Pua? Zu Miriam. That's Miriam. Why was she called Pua? Al Shem Shepoa Umedaberes V'Hogal Avlad. Her responsibility is to calm the child. She speaks to the child. She makes sounds to the child. She coos to the child. Like women who try to calm a child that's crying by soothing the child with all kinds of sounds. Okay? So he calls the two of them, Shifra and Pua, the king of Egypt, and he says to them, Vayomer, when you assist in the birth of the Jewish women, the Hebrew women, and you see them on the birth stool, and Beinu, if you see it's a male, you kill the child. But if you see it's a female, a daughter, you let the daughter live. So Rashi over here says, why, if it's a male, you kill the male, and if it's a girl, a daughter, you let the daughter live? And Benhu, lo yamakbid el al schorim, he was only opposed that the male children should live. Why? She'omer lo it's tagninov, because his stargazers, his astrologers had said to him, because ultimately there's going to be a male child born who will be their redeemer. So to prevent that from happening, any male child that's going to be born, because we don't know which child is that child, you killed all the males. That's why the order was given to Shifra Pur to kill the male children on the birth stool. So what happens? Vatirena hamiyaldus is Elokim. The miyaldus, the midwives, they feared God. Lo osu kashdib aleim l'chmisroim, and they did not do as the king of Egypt had spoken to them. So two things. The king of Egypt spoke to them and gave the order. Because they feared Hashem, now the word diber means spoke, that's more formal. It doesn't say kasher omer lohim, as the king of Egypt said to them. It was a dictate. Diber is formal. They did not, as formal as it was, and regardless, although he was king, the Melech Mitzrayim, because they feared Hashem, they did not heed his dictate. Not only did they deliver the children and not kill the males, they even gave them food and drink, whatever was necessary to give them and maintain them to live. That's what they did, Rashi says. Meaning they provided water and mozum, whatever sustenance they needed, they provided for those children. For the male children who originally they were told to kill, okay? What happens? Paro finds out that the midwives did not follow his order. Vayikra melech Mitzrayim lamialdos. The king of Egypt, again, he's referred to the king of Egypt. He calls the midwife, Vayomer lehen, and he says to them, Madu asisen hadover azer. Why did you do what you did? I mean, not only did you let them live, but you provided water and whatever sustenance they needed. Vatomarna, listen to this. So till now, we find Paro is referred to as Melech Mitzrayim. The king of Egypt spoke to them, and then it says they did not listen to the king of Egypt. Why did they not listen? Because they feared Hashem, and therefore they did not listen to the dictate, the formal dictate of the king of Egypt. The king of Egypt calls them and says, why did you do what you did? Not only did you let them live, you even provided whatever was needed for them. Vatomarno hamialus el paro. It doesn't say the midwife said to Melech Mitzrayim. The Mialda said to Paro, Ki lo chanosh mitrios ivrios, that the women, the Jewish women, are not like the Egyptian women. Ki choyos heino, they're like animals. Just as an animal doesn't need a midwife to deliver its offspring, but terem tova alein hamial ledes v'chod yolodu. Before the midwife arrives, the child already is born. The whole idea initially was the mother should not be aware that the midwives are actually killing the children. It was all on the QT. He didn't want that it should be known that genocide is taking place here. So they said to him, by the time we arrived, the women, they delivered their own children. So it was impossible to kill the child. That's what they're saying. But again, there's a change, there's a shift. Until now, Paro was referred to as Melech Mitzrayim, the king of Egypt. When they finally responded, why? They said, but Tomru Amiyaldos el Paro. Why did we go from the Melech Mitzrayim to Paro? 1 second. Vayetev Elokim Lamiyaldos. And the God did good for the midwives. Vayiravom. How did he do good for them? Vayiravom vayatzum v'ot. They increased in number and they became empowered. So the question of Vayatzim we discussed yesterday means they were all the children, although they were multiple children every birth, they weren't all healthy, or they were all people of standing. And because the Mialdus feared Hashem, it's a little difficult here. And because they feared Hashem, Hashem established houses for them, meaning they had lines of prestigious lineage, as Rashi says in a moment. Malchus came from one of them, and Kuna came from the other one, priesthood and whatever. It seems to be, it says, the Hashem did good for the Mialdos. What should have it said? Because they feared Hashem. V'yaslem botim. But it says, Hashem did good for the Mialdos, and they increased in number. Seems to be there's a little bit of a digression here. What good did he do for them? He gave them a reward of batim. As I said, Malchus came from Miriam, and Kuna came from, and Leviah came from Yocheved. Right? That's what it should say to me, but it doesn't say that. It says, God did good for the Mialdos, and they increased in number, and they were empowered. And then it says, and because they feared Hashem, therefore he made for them these prestigious lines, families, simple understanding. So we would said in the past, the shift. Initially, when Paro speaks to them, he speaks to them as Melech Mitzrayim. We discussed Egypt is the height of civilization. Who is the monarch who rules this empire? It's Paro. But what is the power of this man? This is the mightiest civilization, the most advanced civilization. And he knows exactly what he represents. He calls it these two Jewish women who are the head midwives, and he says to them, and he speaks to them as Melech Mitzrayim. He speaks to them with all his authority. He's communicating to them, you understand who I am. A man of that dimension and status and power speaks to you. Usually the level of intimidation is so overwhelming, you begin to stop function. You cannot function in your own capacity. You follow that person's dictate like a robot. That's how intimidated you are. You realize the king of Egypt is speaking to you. I'll give you an analogous case in a moment. He tells them, the king of Egypt says to Shifra and Puah, you must kill the male children on the birth stool. Shifra and Puah did not listen to the king of Egypt. They didn't listen to him. Meaning, although he spoke to them with this power, with this overwhelming level of intimidation, they were not intimidated. They did not listen to the king of Egypt. The king of Egypt summons them as the king of Egypt. And he's reprimanding them. What's going on over here? You know what they answered? Vayomru el Paro. Meaning, you may be the king of Egypt, but you know something? You Paro. You're a figurehead. All you represent is what you people represent. And why did they refer to as Paro? Because if you understand who the real king is, the one who's really in power, you know something, you mean nothing. And therefore, they were able to come up with this other reason, because they were not intimidated and they did the right thing because they feared Hashem. They said, you realize the Jewish women, they're able to deliver their own young, and therefore it's impossible to carry out what you wanted because you didn't want it to appear as genocide. So initially, he spoke to them as Melech Mitzrayim. They did not heed the dictate of the king of Egypt. He summoned them that as king of Egypt. They said to Paro, not to the king of Egypt. Of course, they did not value him as he wanted to present himself and communicate to bring about this level of intimidation. They weren't fazed by him. But because they feared Hashem, therefore they did not heed the word of the king of Egypt, because you're only the king because Hashem put you there. This was the dimension of fear of Hashem internalized to the point that Paro meant nothing to them. We had once mentioned him, Rabbi Salanta. He explained something with a moshel, with an allegory. The way he explained it before we begin the Shmon Esrei, we say Hashem Sosei Tiftach Ufi Agiti Losecha. We ask Hashem to open our mouths that we should be able to utter the praises of Hashem. So the obvious question is, we speak all day. We don't make any special request to ask Hashem to give us the power to be able to speak. But yet, when we enter into the audience with Hashem, we say Hashem Sosei Tiftach Ufi Agiti Losecha, which are the words of David HaMelech. Why? So he explained it with a moshel. This is Rabbi Salanta. There was a czar, was known the czars and anti-Semites, and they did whatever they can. They're the ones who instigated the pogroms, and they were planned, and they instituted a 25-year draft to Christianize the Jews, and children were taken at the age of 8, 10 years old for a 25-year conscription. And they issued all kinds of decrees against the Jews. And whenever they would issue a decree, they would, through bribery and through all kinds of going through the political channels, they would have somebody come and present the case before the czar and plead the case. And very often the czar would somehow, they would touch him in a certain way, and he would actually annul the decree. But whoever would come before the czar, you realize Jews did not speak classical Russian, because the only time the Jews spoke the language of the land is when they were treated as citizens and treated as human beings. Any government that mistreated the Jews, like the Poles and the Russians, the Jews did not speak classical Polish or classical Russian. They only spoke the language well enough just to communicate in business and to interact with the non-Jew, because they despised that society, they despised the government. So if you're going to go present your case before the czar, you have to find a Jew who's slightly assimilated or acculturated, that he's able to present the case with the more sophisticated Russian. But even that's not enough. When you come before the czar, you have to understand and be trained how to speak, your body language. Because the czar, being a rabid anti-Semite, if he senses that the protocols of diplomacy and respect are not followed, he goes into a rage. It could even be worse. So they found a Jew who was going to plead the case of the Jewish people. And he had to train for months, and he rehearsed until he got it down to the T. He was ready to go before the czar. But this czar was such a rabid anti-Semite. The person who came before the czar to present the case, although he rehearsed and everybody agreed he was at a position to present the case, but in his mind he understood that if somehow he should foul up, the czar could go into a rage, and his life is immediately worthless, and you don't know what the consequences of this could be. He stands before the czar, and he's trained and he's ready, and he has all the confidence at the last moment, understanding of what the consequences of this could be. If in fact the czar goes into a rage, he loses the power of speech. The fear was so overwhelming, he couldn't utter a word out of his mouth, and he couldn't express it, and he lost the power of speech. Even after he left the presence of the czar, he could not speak, because the fear of understanding what the czar could do to him, what the czar, what he represented, he lost his power of speech. So Rabbi Salanta explains, if we would have an understanding who Hashem is, it's an audience. You come stand before God, and understanding the Creator, what He's able to do, and the level of unworthiness which we have. Understanding, you're so overwhelmed with this reality, just melt in God's presence. You cannot utter a word. So David, who had an understanding who Hashem was, said that despite the fact that humanly it's impossible to speak in your presence, give me the ability to speak in your presence. That's why David said Hashem so say tiftach ufi agitilosecha. This is Rabbi Yisrael Salanter. So we ourselves, we know we're going to an audience. We don't have that sense of reverence, of fear at all. But at least we say it out of respect that although we're not there, because unfortunately we're not at that level, to sense Hashem's presence, Hashem shall say tiftach, value it as if we are, therefore give us the ability to be able to express ourselves despite who you are. That's how Rabbi Shlomo Salanter explains why the Amidah is introduced with Hashem shall say tiftach ufi agitilosecha. That's the understanding. So Melech Mitzrayim, he's more than the czar. He already instituted the bondage, took an innocent people, enslaves them. The man has no conscience and has no sense of gratitude for what Yosef did at all. And now he says, he summons Shifra and Puah, two Jewish women, the head midwives, I want you to kill the Jewish males. And he speaks to them as Melech Mitzrayim. How do process that. The level of intimidation is so overwhelming, your mind, your emotion ceases to exist. But they did not listen to him because they were not intimidated. Because the fear of Hashem was greater than his fear. They feared no mortal. You may be speaking to us as Melech Mitzrayim, but they responded to Paro. Paro is what? In terms of what he represents. He's this earthy human being who doesn't believe in God. So that was the basis why they did not heed his word. There's a story about Rabbi Shulei Diskin, who was the Brisker Rav before the Beis HaLevi came to Brisk. And it was known that when the Russian army would go through any Jewish town, in terms of what they were able to do, in a moment, they could actually wipe out the whole community. If they felt something wasn't appropriate, the Jews didn't accommodate them appropriately. So whenever they would go through a town, and there was one general, he was notorious for this kind of behavior and reaction. So when they knew he was coming through with his troops, they would stand at attention from dawn in their best Shabbos dress and to show, and when he would walk and he would review the people, they would stand and they would shake in his presence. And he enjoyed it. And he would have a smirk, and he saw how he was intimidating the Jews. The Maral Diskin, Rabbi Shulei Diskin was the chief rabbi, and he says to the people that when the general is coming down about to come down the street, you see him coming from a distance, call me, and I'll come out and greet him, being the chief rabbi of the community. Meantime, the people are staying there from dawn, shaking in their boots because of they understand what this man could do. The Maral Diskin, they call him, he's going to be there in 10 minutes, and the Maral Diskin is relaxed. And he greets the general, and the general right away senses a level of disrespect. Every member of the community is trembling, and he's relaxed, and he shakes his hand. His hand is not ice cold, and everybody else is shaking, trembling. So he says to the rabbi, why is everybody, and he didn't know that he just came out a few minutes before he arrived, where everybody else is standing there from dawn. He says, why is everybody trembling, and why are you so relaxed? So he says to him, he says, in our family, it's really part of our DNA that the more overwhelming fear is, somehow, that's the way we respond. It's not a disrespect. It has to do with our DNA. Our DNA is different than everybody else's. And he convinced the general that was the reality. The reality is the reason why he didn't tremble. As Vatirena Mialdus is Elokim, as the Mialdus, because his level of fear of Hashem was so great, he understood this general cannot do anything to him unless Hashem wants him. You may be a general, but you're only there and you only can do only to the degree that Hashem allows you. If that's the case, I'm relaxed. the other people, the average person, not at that level. This is really the concept, the famous concept of Rechaim Voloshin of Ein Od Milavado, which he says, which the Brisker Rav actually employed when he fled from the Nazis, that if you truly believe Ein Od Milavado, that nothing could happen to you unless Hashem wants it to happen to you, then nothing could happen to you. And that was the level of the Maral Diskin. The level of fear of Hashem was so great, you could speak to us as Melech Mitzrayim. It means nothing. You're only Paro. Therefore, they did not heed his word, and not only did they not kill the children, but rather they provided whatever sustenance was needed to maintain them. Let me just end the recording, and anybody can. Yocheved and Miriam are referred to as Shifra and Pur. Rather than being identified by name, they're being identified by vocation. Shifra is Yocheved, but why is she referred to as Shifra? Because she beautifies the child. Miriam is Pur because she calms the child. It's a Shifra and Pur did not listen to them, did not listen to the king of Egypt, because the midwives feared God. Now, if a person has an only child that was born to them similar to Sori Menu, at an age which was it was miraculous, she had a child, and she loves that child, and somebody says to that mother, we want you to kill your child. Humanly, because of the level of love and attachment the mother has to that child, could the mother kill the child? The mother will not kill that child under any circumstance. The mother would say to that person, you have to kill me first. I will not kill that child. I'll do whatever I can to make that child survive and not allow you to bring about what you want to bring about. Do you know what it means to be a midwife and oversee millions of children being born? That means the workload is beyond human capacity. And Shifra, her responsibility is to beautify the child. Miriam is to calm the child. Paro says to them, you cannot function that capacity unless your life is dedicated to Jewish children. Impossible. You can't survive that workload. That has to be your level of commitment. Now all of a sudden Paro says, I want you to kill those children. So why would you say you can't kill the child? Because you fear God? No, it has nothing to do with fearing God. It's because since I value the Jewish child and I've dedicated my life to make sure when they're born, they should be beautified and calm and ultimately deliver that child to the mother, humanly, it's impossible to do. So you'd say, why did they not heed the word of Paro? Because it's like Paro saying, kill your only child. The mother cannot listen. The mother will not, on any circumstance, follow that order. And this is Shifra and Pur. So I would say, before you get the punchline, why did Shifra and Pur not listen? He, the king of Egypt's dictate. Because she was Shifra and she was Pur. You know what the Torah tells us? That's not why. The reason why they did not heed the word of Paro was it's not attributed to their connection and their love and dedication to delivery of Jewish children. It was only because they feared God, therefore they saw Paro as a mortal, and he's only there because God put him there. So to bring out the specialness, if it would only said Yocheved and Miriam, okay, the reason why they didn't heed the word of Paro because they feared God, but by identifying them in their capacity as midwives, and at that level you'd say it's humanly impossible. Because of that level of dedication, the Torah is saying, but that's not the reason. The reason is it's attributed Vatiren Hamiyaldus Elokim.
Are you saying that they looked at each child as if it was their own?
They looked, because they were dedicated to this love, every child was their only child,
right?
Which they had, which under no circumstance humanly would they do. But yet the Torah says that's not why they didn't kill him. They didn't heed his word because they feared God. So to bring out this feature of the fear of God, therefore they're identified by their vocation rather than by name of who they were. Okay.
Rabbi,
1 second.